We have this horrible situation of people who require justice, and there are people in our community who know. This isn't just about some people off in the distance. There are people in our community who know who killed our people. There are people who know. Somebody has the truth. And so I guess what I want to say is, if you know the truth, talk to somebody. Talk to the police. Come and talk to somebody. These people shouldn't be sitting out there. We shouldn't still not know how Connie died or who Connie was killed by. We shouldn't still not know about Shelley. She shouldn't still not have justice. You know, we shouldn't still be looking for Roy's body. These are actual people in our community that still don't have justice. And it's a national movement, and we need to change all these things naturally. We need to do systematic change, systematically change an inherent system that's allowing them to be gone and speak our truth. More importantly, we need to find these people. And somebody, if you know something, you need to say something, because they're still gone. I guess that's what it is for me. I still think of these beautiful people that we know, that are our family members, and I say, they all need justice. And we shouldn't have to be hashtagging them. There shouldn't be any, oh, we're gonna have to have the first annual something or another. We don't wanna have a second annual. We just want our people back. As I say, I want my people back.
So today we're going to talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women. Just to be clear, this could be triggering for some people. Maybe you've seen the hashtag MMIW on social media, or its counterpart, hashtag MMIWG2. Both stand for missing and murdered Indigenous women, the latter adding on G2 for girls and two spirits. The hashtag was created to spread awareness for a generation's long silent epidemic that has stolen the lives of Indigenous women, girls, and two spirits across the United States and Canada. The hashtag was created to give voice to women whose stories have not been heard. It is shocking that Indigenous women are murdered at a rate 10 times higher than the national average, per the U.S. Department of Justice. And homicide is one of the leading causes of death for young Indigenous women, third for women aged 10 to 24, fifth for ages 25 to 44. Yet many Americans are unfamiliar with the prevalence of the issue.
So there are a lot of problems regarding the missing and murdered Indigenous women's epidemic. First, I think, is lack of knowledge, ultimately. Our history has been written from a colonial perspective. It has, not until recently when we started to learn about decolonization, we're starting to see a more Indigenous perspective of the world and starting to rise in that awareness. A lot of schools don't know about these issues. They're not talked about in history classes. They're not talked about. They don't necessarily have safety classes. And the other thing too is systemic racism. It goes hand in hand with lack of education. Systemic racism is deeply rooted, normal practice of discrimination in the criminal justice system, in employment, unsustainable housing. And there are also a lot of cracks between federal sovereignty and the US government, where the collaboration to get women and girls and Indigenous people help regarding their crimes, it's almost near impossible. They have to go through like a spider web of all of these aspects, and it added to the distrust of the system and institutional betrayal. Cases are lost and forgotten, dismissed, or abandoned.
So just to put a little clarification on this, I am 54 years old, so I think me and Sanyaa might be the oldest ones at this table. So when we were growing up, these were things we didn't talk about. These weren't things that we brought up. We weren't having these conversations with our parents or our mothers or our grandparents. We were advised where we could and could not go as children. However, we also were met with the deaths of friends. I, for one, lost a friend who was 9 years old to a horrific crime that was committed by a high school student, and I was only 11. So the conversation at that time never came into play. So when we talk about having this conversation today, this is 54 years in the making. So, and I don't, so I just want to fill in that little bit of a gap. So.
I do agree with you completely. As a Native person and a person of older generation, there has been a neglect of information, teaching to be safe, teaching to have support ability that was taken away by our elders generationally through colonialism. So I agree.
Well, it's interesting to hear that because I come from a family, right? I'm quite a bit younger than you, Janalee. But I come from a family where my grandmother, my nanny, when we would walk down the street, I remember walking past O'Hashi's and Diane's, she would point across the street and she would tell me exactly what that man did. So I think that, but in my family, we were literally the only portion of our family or family unit that did not have somebody that ended up being molested, sexually assaulted, or disappeared. That we could have both men and women. So I think that it was an intentional thing. She didn't want that to touch us, and so not that it happened to every person in the family, but our family unit, our smaller family unit, it hadn't happened within the household as a young age, and so I think she was very intentional in that, and so. I think there is a blessing, though, to have those conversations early on, so you are aware that you shouldn't have to keep yourself safe, that other people should be keeping you safe, but that you know what's going on. I think when you're talking about colonization, too, I think one thing we have to remember, too, is that not only are Native people not in history books or anywhere except for, at colonization. Our heroes are erased. They don't exist in any of those. We don't talk about our poetry. All the images are highly sexualized. When you do see Native people, it's this highly, it's the mystic Indian or the highly sexualized Native American woman. And that really contributes to it as well. There's a really great project by Illuminative that I encourage everybody to look at that really talks about the erasure of Native people when it comes to that. It's just important to remember that this isn't part of our culture, that not treating women or anybody with respect, the idea of taking life in a violent manner, that's sexual in nature. It's not part of traditional Native culture. It didn't exist. We had really strong laws, and we had very much an eye for an eye society. And what I'll say for that is, my grandmother remembers a person who, when she was little, who raped somebody. And what they did in her village when she was a little girl is they took that man and they tied him to a pole in the middle of the square, and everybody hit him. in his no-no region. And then they put him on an island and with no water. And that's where he left him. That was the way that they addressed her early memory, somebody who perpetrated a crime of sexual abuse on somebody. It was serious, and it was taken care of fast and swift. And so it's important to realize that in our traditional laws, we took this very seriously, and to have this be an epidemic now, it's why I think it's so shocking to all of us, and we don't talk about it. It's shameful. And I guess I wanted to say as well is that Jana Lee, who's born and raised in this community and has Native children and has experience with having Native friends for all of her life, unfortunately, she's witnessed and experienced a lot of things and had to have serious conversations with her kids, but she's not Native. And so, unfortunately, when you look at the two of them, she's less likely to die or be murdered statistically. And so to have two women of similar age range sitting here in this panel, and to think about what that means, to know that if you're friends with Native people, that they're just statistically more likely to go missing.
And understanding that privilege, understanding that my privilege and my vulnerability as a woman and a community member is that I have grown up where 14 or more of the people that I knew and loved as friends died or went missing, and we don't know where they went. And that memory of the last time you saw that person, the last time you saw that person, the last time you had a conversation with that person is still ingrained in my memory. From the 10-year-old or the 9-year-old to the, because I bartended, so I knew, and just having those memories of those people, and they haunt me. And what I could have done differently. And I think we all, survival guilt is a thing that we all have to embrace, and it's a harsh reality growing up here, and it's really hard on me as a, I am mixed in more ways than one. My family is blessed in that way on my mom's side, and I come from a Norwegian family, so this is a Sami coat, and it reminds me of my grandmother. And one of the things I've had to learn is that my colonization was that we don't talk about these things. We shove them as deep as we can under our rug, and we live with that. And to me, it's never been, it has not resolved the issue. But now that my children are Native, I have 3, so 1 in 3, you think about that. Those statistics haunt you to the point where even as grown adults, I worry constantly. Because I can't tell them not to risk themselves. They're going to live their lives. And but having that conversation with your children and knowing that in 2008, when I started having that conversation with my 9, 8, and 6-year-old, that there were young girls and boys going missing out of the northern region of Kotzebue and disappearing in Anchorage. And then the corporation in the region, NANA, put out a warning to parents to have the conversation. It took the governor 4 years to have that conversation with the state, and it bothered me. It bothers me that we still have people who do not want to have this conversation in the white community and non-Native community. They don't want to have a conversation about what could happen. And who's to say that it couldn't happen to their own children? by not having that conversation, you are setting your children up for not being prepared for the worst case scenario. And I'm not saying it will happen. I hope it never happens. I had a cousin who was almost abducted in Oregon, who is extremely, I mean, she's very blonde, blue-eyed, white. But my experience as a child in high school was, I was stalked in high school. And from my experiences, due to what happened with Gloria Green when I was 11, I became very hyper aware, and I protected myself. But I didn't have adults helping me protect myself.
As a white individual myself, it is really important for this epidemic and issues like this to be as loud as possible. You cannot hide under your privilege. You cannot, because your friends and neighbors are dying at disproportionate rates. It's a known fact that missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, domestic and sexual violence against the Indigenous community is perpetrated by mostly non-natives. With that being said, we can't be silent about this as non-Indigenous people. We have to speak up for the voices that are being lost currently, right now. It's just as hard as it is to have those conversations about racism and recognizing your privilege and your own internalized racism, your outward racism, your ignorance. It's really important to have these conversations with the community, to be educating yourself on what this is and why it is hung up in a public place. It's to raise awareness. It's not to cater to your kids. It's not to cater to the sensitivity of white people. It's meant there to raise awareness and to say, hey, this needs to stop. We need to action plan now before another one goes missing, before another one gets murdered.
I think that's so important. And it was intentional. So when Jan and Lee and I started, we started talking in January, right? And then you started having meetings with WISH and with KIC afterwards. But Jan and Lee and I sit in a group of women. It's like a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Collective. We have a little Facebook page where we talk about different ways and who we can network with to have this conversation. We chose that part because it's dangerous. So for me, my first memory, I was never allowed in City Park. I was never allowed in Schomburg Trail. Those were the two no-go places because they are unsafe. I always knew they were unsafe. My grandmother would never let me be there. My mom would never let me be there. I stayed the night with my dad one time, and it was Easter, and I remember being in Easter dress. I was babysitting my stepsister Jamie, and we went to the park because he let us. And I was kind of concerned. I said, hey, I'm not allowed to go there, but we went anyway. I remember being on the big log in the park and turning her over, and there was a non-native man fondling himself, touching his penis, playing with himself. And that was my experience, the first and only time I broke the golden rule of not being in that park. You know, and I was little. I think maybe I was 11, and she was like 3 or 4 years younger than me. I remember having to run up and down the street looking for a cop because my grandmother wasn't home and she lived fairly close. And so I just remember that profoundly. And so for me, when I read that comment, I was really scared because in my mind, when we picked that installation place, it never occurred to me that there were any children in that park by themselves. Because it was such a no-go, and I live a block away from there. Like, I live a block, I still safety plan, I still don't go in that park after dark. Even after they put up lights, I would never consider it. So for me, like, when we intentionally picked that area, it never occurred to me that there would be a child there alone seeing that, because I just assumed every child that went there, honestly, and that's my own, I guess, hyper-awareness of the activities that happen at work. I thought that there would be somebody there to have that conversation with the child, because nobody wants any children to be scared. But then there's the honest to goodness truth. I was talking to my mom afterwards. She said, what about Connie? Connie died in a pool just 2 areas up, you know, so she started reciting the names. She started reciting the names of her friends who had been raped in that area, and like she just started going through there. And so I guess for me, I would just say that it was never an intention to scare children either. For me, when we chose it, we honestly didn't think there would be any children ever in that park alone, because that was just what we knew. And we actually thought about moving it to Schoenbar Trail after all that defacing and all that awful stuff happened, and there was all those racial slurs and everything.
Yeah, because when I grew up, there were 8, maybe 9, I could be wrong on the numbers, but multiple girls that were raped between the ages of 7 and 10 on Schoenbar Trail. I am, again, 54 years old. I have never walked Schoenbar Trail. To me, it has been off limits my entire lifetime. And it was off limits to a lot of kids, even regardless of whether they were Native or white, because of that. It was a horrendous thing.
I used to get sent to get hot dogs every single, like, from the city park, from concessions. I was never allowed to run through City Park, even though it was shorter to go get a hot dog for the family. You always had to go around. And so I feel for that person who experienced that. I also have some red flags and just want to say, parents, even in the daytime, that park, you should be careful.
That's true. We all have the responsibility to have conversations with our children to be safe. What does it look like? If you're having that hard conversation, there's some great books that can be read to children. I think it's the Alaska Raven Reads has some great sensitive cultural topics that are easy to read, and it can help break the ice. Yeah.
So I just wanted to elaborate on some of the things that Riley had said. I personally think part of the problem is that we frame this issue as a Native issue. And like Riley just said, a lot of the violence that's enacted against Native people is enacted by non-Native people. So I think like the installation in the park, it is so important for it to be there so that non-Native people can witness that, can see all of these missing Native women, and embrace that discomfort, that it is an issue that does belong to non-Native people, and we are the ones who need to stand up and talk about it, because the violence isn't going to stop until we're the ones who take ownership of it. So if your kid is seeing these dresses in the park and is having conversations about it, like, that is wonderful, and it's totally okay to be uncomfortable. This is an uncomfortable topic. But when you're having these conversations, you are humanizing the people who have gone missing, the people who have been injured by this, and you're telling these kids very young that it's not okay to treat people this way. And I think that that is a wonderful message to put out in the community. Like, nothing about the installation is gory or unsightly or anything like that. It's just saying these women are no longer a part of our community, and we don't know why. Or we do know why. It's because people think it's okay to treat Native women this way, and we need to really stand up and firmly say that it's not okay to treat them that way. And I do believe that that is our responsibility as non-Native people, to take on ownership of that. So to the people who are seeing this, like, I encourage them to do more research and to think deeply about why do they feel so uncomfortable about this. And it can be very uncomfortable to be confronted with things like this, but we have to recognize that this violence doesn't just happen in a vacuum. Humans are causing the violence, and we need to be the ones to stand up and say, no, we're not going to perpetuate this violence anymore. That's what I had to say about that.
And you know, there's this thing about protecting the family name, and it was brought up recently. And you know, one of the things is that as you know, I'm from the Hunt family, so my family came here in 1898. And one of the things I can say is that regardless, I, as a 6th generation Ketchikan non-Native, need to take responsibility for my family history. I can do that. I grew up here. I have a great respect for the Native community. And throughout history, I hope that, you know, there's changes that happen within family generations, and we are blessed with learning from our families, and sometimes we have poor history, or we have, our family has transgressions against groups of people. We, as the next generation, that's where we take our privilege and we own that, and we make the change. We work to make that change between the different groups. If we are embarrassed by that, that's understandable, but owning it and taking responsibility and stepping up to the plate and saying, we're going to put a stop to this. This is where we end it. This is our time. Whether we're white, native, black, brown, this is where we end it. We come together and we say no more.
Absolutely.
I'd like to talk on the statistics and the database discrepancies in terms of the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples epidemic. A lot of this data is not on these databases like NamUs or whatever personal police databases there are, and there are several reasons for this. One of the first and foremost is how rural a lot of Native communities are in terms of reservations, in terms of just location. Here in Alaska, we have the village police security, and a lot of terrain is hard to access. I know that there are villages where if a 911 comes in, it's a severe situation, police, like state police, have to get on some sort of flight to that, and it depends on weather. So by then, where are the lives? Like if that was a really dangerous situation, they're gone.
Also, Native people face some of the highest rates of police brutality, so there's also a hesitancy to even call the police if you have access to them.
Exactly. The history of police violence against Indigenous people is exponential. So even that distrust in the system, going back to that institutional betrayal that Indigenous people often feel and are facing a lot of the time. The other thing too is just having to make those reports. A white counterpart can make a police report and probably get traction that same day. That child went missing, that white child is missing, flyers are up, Amber Alert, everyone's aware of it, newscast, national news, everyone's looking for this particular person, this particular license plate. You have an Indigenous child that goes missing, they'll probably be around. Just keep an eye out for them. It's been 3 days. They're still not around. Police are like, all right, we'll look into it. There's not an Amber Alert. There's not any sort of community involvement, or at least not at the capacity as a white counterpart. It's really disproportionate. With the database, it's also systemically racist too, because of that. A lot of these communities don't have a means of having access to that database without having to pay, an arm and a leg to have access to submit their information. Some of them charge fees. It's quite ridiculous, and it makes it impossible. So it goes along with that whole web of not getting justice.
And then just maybe touch on the fact that victim blaming, being blamed for what happened to you, and knowing that you will be, you could be crucified. That has to end too.
Right. And so one thing moving forward with the advocacy of this gap in all the different levels of the legislature, federal, state, tribal departments not talking to each other when we have a missing person and we need to act fast. We've seen over and over gaps. And some progress that is happening that's helping is the October 2010 Act, No Invisible Act, which created a joint commission to work on this topic. And also there was the Savannas Act, which helps with creating a database. So these are exciting things, and it only happened with many voices. And so to keep our people safe, it's important that we all keep this going alive through our stories, like what you have in our small communities. And together, it's slowly happening. So here in Ketchikan, we're looking to keep those bridges of communication going, work to advocate for safety of our people in every way we can. And if we see and hear and know of a gap, we're here. So that's what we're looking to do, to keep the young ones safe that grow up to be leaders, and the victims of the missing and murdered Indigenous people. So that history, we still want to continue working to reduce all these cases in our community.
And there's, just one of the other things we need probably to touch on is the databases that are being created by the Native communities across the United States and Canada are not being done by the government. They're being handwritten and created by people turning in those names. So if anybody knows somebody, they need to I don't know where we start with that, gathering names. I've noticed on Facebook, since we started this installation, that names have been popping up, pictures, and people, I had no idea. And so that has created that conversation, which is beautiful, because now those people are no longer invisible. But putting those into a database is the next step.
Well, I think the non-Native perspective, I spent a lot of time reading what Native people had to say about non-Native allyship, because if you're going to be a good ally, you have to know who the people you're allying yourself with actually want you to do. And I also think the word ally is really, we throw it around a lot in recent culture, and it's important to know that you don't get to label yourself an ally. The people who you are working with are the ones who get to label you an ally, and they will label you an ally by your behavior. So I think I just want to say that up front. And then some of the things that we can do, we have a lot of work to unpack. Like, historically, America has devalued the lives of women, it's devalued the lives of Indigenous people, it's devalued the lives of anybody non-white. And so missing and murdered Indigenous women is a natural byproduct of our culture that has said that it's okay to treat these people as less than human. So our very first step, in my opinion, is to humanize them. Like, if you are a non-Native person, you should know whose land you are on, and I think that that's important, and know the historical context of the colonization of that land, and recognize that Native people are still very much alive and practicing their culture and part of America. And you should also strive to read books by Native authors and listen to podcasts by Native people. And all of this serves to humanize Native people so that we're building that empathy. I'm sorry, I'm having such a mask problem. Because it's so much harder to commit violence against somebody who you think is a person. And I think a lot of this is really built down deep into our culture of treating Native people like they are not human, like they are less than human. And so it is a large part of our job to teach our children, to teach our friends, to recognize Native people as full people who have their own culture and history, and how valuable that is. And some of like the little tiny things that you can start to do is even like unpack your language. Like, are you using any racist terms, even if you don't necessarily recognize that they're racist? Things like spirit animal or lowest on the totem pole, like these sort of phrases are racist, and we should acknowledge that. And so once we start doing that decolonization in ourselves, we can move it outward as well.
I do agree with that statement. It takes, you have to put your place in a Native perspective, we do live in two worlds. We do live, they can be home and have the native world and traditions inside their home, and then to step out into a world where there's complicated laws to overcome to help their missing person. It takes a lot of communication to know that. It takes a lot of listening to their stories, and a lot of people don't have the patience for that, but it's very important to listen to them and know who they are and what they need for that moment. I agree.
I have a friend who likes to tell me, she doesn't like the word ally at all. She doesn't believe anybody can be an ally, and that she had to recognize recently that allies exist, and so that was kind of a fun thing, to see in her, to be able to see that somebody could genuinely come from their heart, because there's such a distrust. But additionally, I have another friend who always likes to tell me, says, I don't like the word ally, because when somebody gets to the point of being an ally, really what they are is family. So ally is a very Western way of looking at being family, right? And so I think that that's something to acknowledge too, that it will resonate in a lot of Native people that an ally is something different. Ally is another word, but when you're in a community and you reach that certain level, it is a family. You become part of a family, and we don't give our family up ever. And so I think that's that. I think as a Native person, I often look to people, and the people that I know are, really get it. When they really get it, they cease to be, in my mind, that term of an ally, right? And you know that they're just your family forever. And so I think it's important, though, that we all are allowing space for everybody to have their opinions, but in a kind way. And I think that that's part of what it is. You have to educate yourself, because so much of our history and who we are is erased. I want to think about all these ladies that are erased, though, and our men. I want to say briefly that I believe President Biden listed yesterday, May 5th, as Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Day. And I believe that one of the reasons is that we have another group of people that's highly victimized, and that's our two-spirited people in our community. And for those of you, I guess you don't know that term, two-spirited, it's somebody who both is male and female. They identify in a different way. They were given to us by the Creator for a different purpose, and they're easy to victimize because society and even laws across the United States purposely still target two-spirited people. And so when you look at people who can be victimized are people that you don't believe deserve respect, and that you can't see, and you don't want to see. And so I think that's one of those impetuses for doing that. But here in Ketchikan, even though we're talking about the murdered and missing Indigenous people, or missing and murdered Indigenous women, well, we have to recognize that there's a whole society of people, beautiful people that we love, that are even more vulnerable based upon a society's decision to decide that they aren't human. And so including that is profound, and it's important, and it's controversial, unfortunately. It's still a controversial conversation. Even though traditionally in Native American culture, a two-spirited person was considered to be precious, to be really, really precious, and inhabited their own almost spiritual realm. They had a specific profound place in culture. When you look at different cultures, and you talk about the ceremonies that revolve around somebody who's two-spirited. But then I want to say, also that when I heard the word person, I didn't even think honestly of two-spirited people. When I realized that name, I thought in my mind of all of our men here in town, our Native men who are gone. I thought of Hambo, and, I thought of Thomas. I thought of Roy, and I thought, who am I forgetting? There's a fourth name. Why am I forgetting his fourth name? Albert. And these people are missing, and I think I have two uncles who are chronically homeless. On any given day, I don't know if I'm going to hear word from, Fairbanks or Anchorage or Seattle that they're dead, right? So we have this horrible situation of people who require justice, and there are people in our community who know. This isn't just about some people off in the distance. There are people in our community who know who killed our people. There are people who know. Somebody has the truth. And so I guess what I want to say is, if you know the truth, talk to somebody. Talk to the police. Come and talk to somebody. These people shouldn't be sitting out there. We shouldn't still not know how Connie died or who Connie was killed by. We shouldn't still not know about Shelley. She shouldn't still not have justice. We shouldn't still be looking for Roy's body. These are actual people in our community that we still don't have justice. And it's a national movement, and we need to change all these things naturally. We need to do systematic change, systematically change an inherent system that's allowing them to be gone and speak our truth. More importantly, we need to find these people. And somebody, if you know something, you need to say something, because they're still gone. I guess that's what it is for me. I still think of these beautiful people that we know, that are our family members, and I say, they all need justice. And we shouldn't have to be hashtagging them. There shouldn't be any, we're going to have the first annual something or another. We don't want to have a second annual. We just want our people back. As I say, I want my people back.
And we don't want to lose any more.
No.
What it means to me, being a Native and affected by colonialism, as a baby, I was given away. Let me say it was due to the laws of adopt Indian child. So my culture was taken away for years. My brother was killed in Seattle, and my sister had to get that phone call that he was killed. That same month was the month that I called her to say, I'm here, I found you. So to have that happen, your loved ones murdered, goes deep. And we just need to stop all this. So with our safety planning, giving the children these tools, giving the women these tools, giving all our people these tools will help. And that's what we're here for. That's why I'm here. I've come back to Ketchikan to help as best I can, and I've got a team. I've got community members that know how to speak for the people who can't speak, for your family, for my family, for your friends. And it's time just to break down the barriers of non-Native and Native, to come together to advocate for these people who are missing, who are hurting, and just getting the word out by events like this is so effective. And we always encourage people to do whatever they can to make a statement, to take care of your relative. And if you know anything about these cases that are cold for years, speak up, bring it to somebody, so we can have peace in our community, so we can have some joy and just spread our safety word. So I'm just happy to be here to help get this word out of safety for our children, what it looks like. If you have trouble knowing how to have this conversation with your children, reach out to people who you believe will know. Gloria, Jenna-Lee, all of us. So important.
The beauty of it is we have all these resources in this community now that we didn't have at one time.
So I believe a lot of people are familiar with WISH's services. So we do have a shelter that's available 24 hours a day, and we have a hotline, which is 907-225-WISH, which is 9474. And you can call it 24 hours a day. Somebody will answer. A couple of the services that we do provide is emergency housing. If you're in an unsafe situation and you need somewhere to stay immediately, you can always come to WISH 24 hours a day. With that, we also provide just general advocacy. And the whole idea of advocacy is it puts the power back in the hands of the person who's been harmed. So it's whatever they identify that they need, whether that is housing or childcare or food or medical help, whatever it is that they need. On top of that, we also do a little bit of legal advocacy. People need help filling out paperwork for divorce or a protective order or child custody, those sort of things. Some of our other resources, we just got a rapid rehousing grant, which is actually available to anybody in the community. So if people are having trouble finding housing, they can get a hold of us and we can help them with that. We also provide food boxes, again, to anybody in the community. So if you're having any sort of food issues, you can reach out to WISH. We just ask how many people you need a box for and give you a box of food. The other thing that we do is sexual assault response. So if people are unfortunately victimized, they can come to WISH and we can walk them through the process. And there's lots of different options. So some people do want to go to the hospital and get medical care. Some people do want to go to law enforcement. Some people don't want any of that. And like I said, advocacy is all about what the victim wants. So we can help them identify what is best for them and what those different options look like, so that they can make the choice that they want, and an advocate can be with them the whole time. On top of that, we also have our education department, which is where I work, and we are in the school district. We teach kids as young as pre-K all the way up through 9th grade about healthy relationships and safe touch and unsafe touch, and how do you get help if something unfortunately happens to you or one of your friends when you're a kid. One of the other great programs that we have is our Green Dot Bystander Intervention Program. And so that one is open to the community, and what it teaches is, if you've ever been in a situation where you thought, oh, this is uncomfortable or potentially unsafe and I need to do something, but you don't know what to do, like that's a totally normal thing. It's the bystander effect. And so this training helps us understand the bystander effect and how do we get around it and still speak up when we think that it's important. So we have lots of resources. You can check out our website at wishak.org and read all about the resources that we have. Would you like to talk about KIC's resources?
Absolutely. We are very happy to work with WISH in the empowerment support group that we've done weekly, and is still going on. We have a lot of support groups also. We have Harvest for Healing for victims of crime and domestic violence. Riley and I and Brianna and Valerie, we work these groups, and we just started in April. And we have the sexual assault and domestic violence program going now too as well. And last month we were very active in many different events. We had, do you want to take that over, what we did for the events for April?
Yeah, so in April we had a community outreach kind of barbecue-esque event for opening our brand new victim services program, where we offer services to all victims of crime in Southeast Alaska, not just limited to Ketchikan, not just limited to Indigenous people, it's for everyone. So we wanted to spread awareness on that event. We also had a Sexual Assault Awareness Month open microphone, collaborating with WISH. where people had a safe space to talk about sexual assault and their experiences. And then we also had the MMIW events going on, the Red Dress Project at City Park, as well as a candlelight vigil that had to happen virtually versus in person because of COVID escalations. It was very unfortunate, but we made it happen. We raised awareness, people showed up. Yeah.
That's right. We have access to a new grant, Office of Crime Victims, so that's something that we are working with to help our community stay safe, advocate for them legally. If they want advocacy for legals, going to court, or any other things, we have that. Even if they're out of the state, we can work that as well. Domestic violence, we collaborate with other departments within KIC and in the community. We are working to connect with the law enforcement to streamline the system to help our crime victims as well.
As well as the courts too. Plus, all of these services are free and confidential. So we are open to hear your story, and if you don't want to share it with others in the community, we're not gonna, our lips are sealed.
I guess I have a question. Does KIC still have the grant that helps them relocate people from other islands when necessary? Do you still have the relocation grant? And does WISH still put money for limited relocation aside?
Yes, so I'm glad you asked because I did forget that. So WISH actually serves all of southern Southeast Alaska, which includes Metlakatla and Prince of Wales. And so if somebody is experiencing violence on another island and they either want to come to here to Ketchikan, whether that's to stay in the WISH shelter or just to be relocated, we can help with that. And other relocation needs, I believe we suss them out on a basis as they come through, but that is something that we do provide because we know sometimes people need to move on to a safer location.
And if I were in a violent situation right now and I had no transportation to get to WISH, I could call the shelter and you would arrange for me a way to get to WISH, correct?
Absolutely, yes. Great questions. I also forgot to mention we now have our mental health counselor at the high school. So if there are any young people who just need somebody to talk to, her name's Sam Funk. She's in the counseling center at K-High and her door is just open. Anyone can walk in, it's free of charge, it's confidential, and she'll help young people navigate getting consent from their parents. And that's a really cool program. And we have a grant to do the same thing in the middle school and elementary school. And we are currently working to hire the counselor. And this is also a collaboration with KIC where they have lent us a tribal behavioral health aid, I believe. So it's a great program.
Great. I guess I continue my plea. If you know something, please call and say something, keep speaking up until that word gets out so we can find all of our people and they can have their justice. I guess I want to say is that everybody in Ketchikan could be a resource if they chose to be. What I mean by that is I was telling the ladies before, I think it might have been recorded as well, that I often help relocate people on a weekly basis because I used to work at Women in Safe Homes. You know, I have people who call me, send me messages 3 o'clock in the morning every day since I quit, essentially, you know, or since I stopped working there. So on a weekly basis, I help get people to resources, and I think being open to have the conversation the 7th time and knowing how to safety plan. If you're in a violent situation, think about the things you need to leave. You don't have to leave right now. You know, get your birth certificate, get your ID, get a change of clothes, find a friend who will keep your bag. You know, think about what things, is it your dog that's keeping you there? Is it your children that are keeping you there? And start identifying the things that are putting you in danger. And know if he strangles you, then it's serious. You need to find a way out, because the conversation we may be having next, or most likely will be having next, is a conversation at your funeral. So I just to say, if you're in an unsafe situation, you don't have to go to WISH, you don't have to go to KIC to do that safety planning. You can look those things up online. But it's always easier when you have somebody who's just going to listen to what you have to say.
I'd like to add to that too. It takes an average of a survivor 7 times to leave an abusive situation. And then once they do leave that abusive situations, they are 7 to 8 times more likely to be murdered. That rate goes higher for Indigenous women and girls, Indigenous people, LGBTQ.
And I'll add to that, if you're that friend that has had that phone call and that conversation with that person who's tried to leave and has gone back, and you're looking at number 7 to 14, it should never be, I'm done. Always remember that at the end of the day, you do what you can to help that person navigate that situation, to get out of that situation. Because it should never be about, you only get 7, you only get 8, you only get 5, you only get 1. We have to understand that we don't get to judge. We cannot ever understand where that person is at. We have to meet that person where they're at. We can't demand that they meet us where we are at. And sometimes it's really easy, it's really hard, I get it, to not understand and not be able to move on or keep going. And it can be very taxing, but at the end of the day, it's making sure that your friend and family member is safe and not having that conversation at the funeral. So I can only stress that no matter what, I don't care how many times. And it's the same with substance abuse. I've spent many years working in substance abuse and growing up in that arena, and knowing that, hearing someone tell you they're going to get better over and over again, well, you have to just, it's hold the line, because at some point you're just there going, it could be this time, it could be the next time, but I'm going to be here.
I think when you get those phone calls, like the most important thing that you can do as someone who loves someone who's going through an unhealthy relationship is to just believe them. Like, we do live in a culture of victim blaming, and that question of like, why don't you just leave? And there is all of these complicated issues, Gloria touched on. And so like the single most important thing we can do is just believe them.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And the moment of leaving your abuser is the most treacherous, the most dangerous. So like Gloria said, be prepared, do your safety planning, think in your mind, and have that ready. And there are so many people available to help, and this is why we're having this conversation, is to get the word out, so we have no more MMIP people in our community.
So as we close today, I would like to share a song. It's the Tired Paddler song. I think that my spirit always feels sad and tired, but I need that strength, and that's what this paddle song does. It's a song that we sing when we're exhausted, when we feel like there's nothing left in the tank to continue on that canoe. And I think that when we talk about such a serious issue and we're holding space, it's important. And as we're sharing this song, and we're sharing this song in the traditional lands of the Sanyaa Kwáan people, and we know that in town we have the land of the Ganahari, of the Taant'a Kwáan, and so share this song, and I have respect for the fact that we're having this conversation in the traditional homelands of their homelands in Tlingit Aani. Hey.